Hi everyone, I'm Jimmy Nguyen, and as I was saying, I was born actually not too far from Hong Kong in Vietnam, in Saigon. My family left Vietnam at the end of the Vietnam War in 1975 and moved to the United States, where I was raised. So being an immigrant to the United States, I learned two things pretty quickly. One, I learned that people in America could not pronounce my last name. So, as you see here, I have the quintessential famed Vietnamese last name, where more than half of the people in Vietnam have that last name. So, in Vietnamese, it's pronounced Nguyen, with lots of kinds of intonations. But in the United States, you know, people pronounce it Nguyen, Nguyen, Nijin, all kinds of things. Every Asian person in the room probably has had that experience at some point or another, right? But then Americans eventually found an Americanized pronunciation of it, which was Nguyen. So I started learning and thinking to myself in life about the power of wins, which we're going to talk about today. And secondly, I learned that being an immigrant in the United States, you could run away from the fact that you were different, or you could embrace it as a philosophy in life and in business as ways to win. So merging those two lessons, I spent a lot of my adult life thinking about how we encourage people and businesses to win by being different. And that's what is so exciting about the Bitcoin and blockchain world. You're all embarking on this mission to change the world with something different and to help all of you and the businesses around you in this ecosystem win. So today what I want to talk about is nChain's mission. We know as a business that nChain, when it was first created, operated in stealth mode, and that allowed a lot of people to ask questions about, well, what exactly are you doing? What the heck is Dr. Wright doing? What's he doing over there in this nChain company? So I'm here today to help answer some of those questions and talk to you about what our mission is, and more importantly, my philosophy about how we need to achieve win-wins in life. nChain's mission, in a nutshell, is to enable Bitcoin exponential growth for everyone to win. And that's something that's important for you to all understand. If you have questions about what nChain is, we are an enabling company. We are developing research and technologies that, of course, we want to find business success with. But it's really designed for all of you and the people around the world in the Bitcoin community to use to enable you to achieve your wins. So our mission is twofold. One, we are a research and development business, and our innovation has these two goals. First, to enable massive on-chain scaling of the Bitcoin network. We're already beginning to take steps in that process. We've made an announcement about discussions we've had with a proposed collaboration with Bitcoin Unlimited, for example, to support research into on-chain scaling of the Bitcoin network and hopeful funding of a testnet that we want to support to test large block sizes. So that's one example of what we're doing. Second, our technology and innovation is designed to enable companies to perform more complex functionality on the Bitcoin network, because we believe that all of these other altcoins and all of these other attempts to create other blockchains become unnecessary in a world where Bitcoin is the place where you can do all that. But we know that the Bitcoin network and its coding system isn't obviously designed for that. And so we are coming up with technical solutions to make it easier for all of you in this room and those out in the Bitcoin world to accomplish that more complex functionality. To do so, our research and development team has been working on all kinds of research, which leads to, I'm sure you've heard, lots and lots of patent applications. And many people have been wondering, well, what are these things and what are you going to do with them? So today, I want to take the next minutes to discuss some of the key early innovations that our team, led by Dr. Wright, has come up with. This is just the tip of the proverbial iceberg, but it will give you some ideas of what we're creating and, more importantly, how it can help all of you in this room to achieve your wins in the Bitcoin network. So I'm going to talk about 7 key innovations, but really focus in particular on our first couple. You see them listed on the screen. I'm going to go through them one by one, and hopefully they'll give you an idea of what we're doing and why we think it's going to be so valuable to this whole Bitcoin world. So our first win we think we have produced is this one. This is one of what I would call our foundational techniques and patent applications. And by the way, all of the things I'm talking about today, we're talking about publicly because we have filed patent applications for them and are beginning the internationalization process. So they're protected by our claimed inventions. So the first one we call a deterministic key generation technique. Now, if you've ever read a patent application and have ever dealt with patent lawyers, you'll know that we like to use lots and lots of words. So before I joined nChain, I had a 21-year career as an IP and digital tech lawyer. So I used to have to read a lot of these things. I know they're painful. I'm going to try and simplify them as much as I can today. The official title of the patent application is at the bottom here: Determining a Common Secret for the Secure Exchange of Information and Hierarchical Deterministic Cryptographic Keys. What the heck does that mean? We call it for short a deterministic key generation technique. And what we believe this is a pivotal security invention that can be used and implemented by people in this room. What it does is enable secure communication between a pair of nodes or parties on a network without the need to store a common secret, so that it's less vulnerable to a hack attack. And the common secret is instead separately determined by each party on the basis of a shared message. The benefits are increased security for things such as a digital wallet, for control of Bitcoin, or any other form of digital asset. Let me walk you through how this works through some diagrams. So, with any kind of digital wallet, we know that typically you'll have parties which have their own private key and public key. So here's a diagram. You have a first node on the left, a second node on the right. They each have private key and public key. So they exchange their respective public keys while keeping their own private keys, as you would expect in the normal situation. They also exchange, as you see in the middle here, a message. This is a message that they both receive. And then they agree between them on this in the middle, a deterministic key. This is going to be very key to how this particular technique works. We call it a deterministic key because it is a key, it's based upon the message, and the key is deterministic because it will be produced upon the use of a key generation algorithm, and it will be produced in the same way each time. Each node then determines something else, which is an updated version of, let's say, start with the first node, the private key, using both the existing private key and the deterministic key, an updated version of their private key. They'll also do that on the other side, creating an updated version of the other party or other node's public key based upon that public key and the deterministic key. And why are they doing that? They're doing that, but they do that, by the way, by applying a mathematical process which is described in the patent application. That's kind of a neat and clever a method that Dr. Wright here invented. And then each pair of nodes determines a common secret. And the common secret is based upon their own updated private key, right, which you see over here, and the other node's updated public key, which is this multi-step process, as you can see diagrammed out here. And the reason that's important is that this deterministic key and then the common secret is going to be common to both parties. So I did that as node number one, and then the other node on the other side is going to basically go through the same process in the inverse, right? Creating updated versions of their own private key, updated versions of the first node's public key, developing a common secret which will be the same and thus able to be shared between both parties, and using this common secret provides a mechanism to send a secure communication between the two parties. And the reason why that is beneficial is that it allows the secure communication to happen without the parties needing to store this common secret. That provides the security innovation which we think is very important for protecting security in the Bitcoin world. Now, examples of how this technique can be used, first that comes to mind are digital wallets, right? Because in the Bitcoin world, that's very important. And public and private key pairs are commonly used with wallets. However, those create particular problems, right? If you as the wallet user lose your private key, right, or somehow it gets compromised, you have a problem. It also requires trust in the service provider who's providing the wallet, because if the service provider, if they're holding your private keys and they are hacked or compromised, then your assets or funds are potentially at risk. And we saw that with the Mt. Gox hot wallet being hacked. And so how can we create a system where the private key can be saved and stored in a way that it can't be obtained by someone who's unauthorized? But it can be reproduced when it's necessary. And that leads us to a second invention that, when used in combination with this one, creates a very powerful, in our view, security win. And that is what we call this. I'll give you the full name and then what we call it. Securing multi-party loss-resistant storage and transfer of cryptographic keys for blockchain-based systems in conjunction with the wallet management system. Dr. Wright, that is a mouthful. We refer it, I know you didn't name it, our patent lawyers did. So for shorthand, we refer to it as a secure split key technique. What it is a technique to split cryptographic keys, or just the mnemonic seed for the cryptographic key, into a plurality of shares. And he's talked a little bit about it earlier this morning. I want to walk through this particular technique. Each of those fragments or shares are stored in separate places and controlled separately, and the key can be restored or regenerated from 2 or more of those shares depending on how the system is set up. So what this does is avoid the security risk of a single person, a single wallet provider, or any single source holding the private key or trusting it to some third party. So let me give you a diagram of how this would basically work. So you have the verification element, which is essentially, of course, the cryptographic key. It could also be the mnemonic seed, as I mentioned. It's split into a plurality of shares using the recognized Shamir's secret sharing scheme 4S, which involves splitting the key into, in this example, 3 shares. It could be a different number of shares. In this example, we're using 3. And the shares can be used to reconstruct the key when needed. Each individual share doesn't have any value apart from the others, right? So if someone just got your individual share that might be held, it's not going to do you any good. But when the number of shares that is determined, let's say in this example, there's 3, let's say you need 2 of 3 in order to essentially reconstruct the cryptographic key. When that number of shares is reconnected together, then you can construct the key. How this pairs in combination with the first invention I talked to you is in the following steps. You would take one of the share fragments. You would use the common secret and deterministic key technique from the first one to be able to encrypt that particular fragment, and then send it to another node or another party so that the share itself is protected and delivered in a way where it has the security protections of our first invention. So if these are combined, what will happen is that you'll be able to have different shares of the key or its mnemonic seed. You can transmit them securely between different parties, and they can be stored in separate locations. And once that happens, you have a situation where the key doesn't exist in its full or complete form until required. Then it is restored or regenerated using the 4S algorithm, which was used to split it in the first place. It's done for that purpose and then no longer kept by the wallet or service provider. And that provides an additional security feature, because then if you hack into the wallet provider, you're not going to find the complete cryptographic key anymore. So the other protection this provides is situations where if you as the wallet user, right, what if you pass away or become incapacitated? Well, other people who have the other fragments, let's say the other 2 fragments, will be able to reconstruct the key and access your funds. For example, if it's an authorized person like your lawyer, whoever is a trustee for a estate or a will, for example, right? Someone who is next in your family to be able to control your assets. So it removes the risk that you, as the only person who control your key, if something happens to you, those funds and those digital assets would potentially be lost. It allows a mechanism to safely empower other people to reconstruct the key. So it provides both a security innovation as well as techniques that would allow people to provide for a way to access funds in a digital wallet if something were to happen to you. And most importantly, we believe this can be used to prevent a future Mt. Gox hack situation, right? If the exchanges and wallet providers implement applications based upon this, they're not going to be subject to the risk of hacking that's happened in the past. So those are some of our key security innovations, and you'll see as I talk that more and more of our innovations implement and build upon these basic security innovations. there's also been a lot of talk in the Bitcoin world about Turing completeness. So as you all know, the scripting language in Bitcoin is relatively primitive, and that is intentionally done. It provides security features, right? And there's good reasons for it because it protects against DDoS-style attacks against nodes in the network. It also ensures that you can have script be completely and robustly tested, which is not generally available in general computing environments. However, because of that, the dream all of us have of being able to use the Bitcoin network for these more complicated functionalities like smart contracts and other things, it's harder to achieve. And so at nChain, what I want you to know is we are using a lot of ideas from Dr. White's head and the rest of our research team's head to find techniques to allow you to achieve that more complicated functionality on the Bitcoin network. So this is one particular idea that has progressed to that. In this particular patent application, if you were actually to go to read it, it demonstrates that the blockchain network is not computationally limited, and instead, we believe it can be allowed to act as essentially the tape within a universal Turing machine, but with external off-chain computing agents that then orchestrate the more complicated behavior and then secure them against the blockchain. So here's a basic diagram of it. It's obviously a lot more complicated than what we can describe on a diagram, but if you think about it, if you have external off-chain processing agents operating up here, they secure their behavior against specific blockchain transactions. The blockchain transactions don't necessarily have to be consecutive, but when they're tied together, they can replicate the cells, as you see below here, of a total Turing machine and connect them together so that we believe the blockchain can act like the tape of a Turing machine. So this would open up an entire new computational paradigm of how people think of the blockchain network. And it allows you to do various things. So we've already come up with one implementation of this paradigm, which is using then the blockchain to secure voting. So voting is important for public elections, corporate shareholder votes, organizational votes. And right now we have to sit and count ballots and do what we need to do, maintain and track them against third-party databases to see who's voted, whether their vote got in on time. What if that could all be securely done on the Bitcoin blockchain? And that's what this does. So the computational flexibility that we open up from the ideas in the last patent application can be used here. This particular application describes the ability to securely track, as I've written here, ballots. The ballots are represented by public keys of the users when they vote, allowing a voting agent to track the votes. So here's a diagram. So let's say you have a vote counter agent. Right? I, as a voter, all the voters are represented down below here, vote. With my public key, the votes were secured against the blockchain transaction. The public key allows us to track who's voted, at what time they have voted, right? To make sure someone doesn't vote twice. And so once that's done, once the ballot's been submitted, the vote counting agent can count from the published blocks in the blockchain who's voted and at what time they voted. So what are some of the benefits of this? Well, you could pre-program in voting cutoffs by the block height. Any vote after a particular block height is invalid, or by time marker, and therefore securely track who's voted, making sure they don't vote twice, they voted on time, without needing an independent or third-party database to track the voters versus the voting data. And it's a way to secure this against the blockchain using the technique I described before. So, continuing on the road to smart contracts, we all know that it'd be great for people to program smart contracts on the Bitcoin network. That would moot the need for Ethereum or other blockchains that are trying to achieve the same functionality. So there's a great deal of excitement about it, but of course, this whole concept of smart contracts on the Bitcoin network is at its infancy. We are coming up with some techniques to address that. Don't have all the solutions yet, but here's an example of one particular technique we think will be helpful for one field of smart contracts, and those are auto-renewing contracts. So these are very common today's day and world, right? Like you sign up online for some subscription, for example, let's say to Amazon Prime or a Spotify account, right? Or your cloud storage account on Dropbox. You often, commit to pay for, let's say, some period of time, a year, and then it will automatically renew usually afterwards, right? You've given them your credit card or payment card information, and if you don't cancel by a certain period, they'll just keep charging you every month. So right now, how the service providers will manage that is by comparing customer information and license information in usually some kind of third-party database where they'll track, do you have, are this the right customer? Have they paid their license? When does it, expire? And when does it renew? If you could make that more efficient by doing this automatically on the blockchain through blockchain transactions, you would raise efficiency levels and, of course, make it faster and easier to get paid by the service provider. And so we've come up with this technique, again led by Dr. Wright, that provides an ability to maintain this version of a smart contract, this particular use case, this auto-renewing contract, using the mechanism that would more efficiently lead to tracking of the auto-renewal. So here's a basic diagram to describe it. And what you would do basically is using the techniques in some of our prior applications, the contracts as well as the renewal and cancellation information would be encoded into the output portions of transactions recorded on the blockchain to allow the service provider to be able to identify the particular digital contract that was entered into, and using sort of those key deterministic key techniques we talked about to have a key derivation about when the contract's supposed to be renewed and therefore automatically charge the person at that time, all tracked through blockchain transactions, particularly through the output portions of the transactions. So that's not a solution to all smart contracts, right? It's a solution to a particularly common form, which is simpler, these auto-renewing ones where you know when it's going to end, you know what the renewal periods are, you know what the amounts of payments are for the renewal periods. But this has a value in this world where these kinds of auto-renewing contracts are very, very common, especially in the digital space. So now I want to conclude by talking about a couple of things in the world of digital rights management. So the power of Bitcoin and blockchain technology is in its ability to eliminate intermediaries, right? And in our world before blockchain, they're very common in business. So one of the areas where eliminating intermediaries would really help is in digital rights management. If you're a content owner, a content producer, right? You're a filmmaker, for example. You want to make your movie, or if you're a music artist, your song, you want to be able to distribute it to consumers, but right now you need all of these companies and people in the middle to get it out to the consumer. But if you could do that and get the value of your creative investment more directly through the blockchain, it would create more efficiencies. And so we've come up with a couple of techniques to make it easier through the blockchain to manage digital rights so that you can distribute content and track, in particular, if you're getting paid for it, right? Because that's what content owners and producers want. So this is a technique which is described as a method and system for securing computer software using a distributed hash table and a blockchain. So this invention applies for content, and this is important, with any executable phase. So a computer software program is an obvious example of that. But it could also work for music and video files because those have executable phases, and even PDF files. So what the technique would do, as is described here, is to check via a blockchain lookup that whoever's trying to access the content already has a valid license for the content, and secondly, that the license still actually is valid, it's paid up, it's in the right time period. So it provides more flexibility for rights holders to distribute their content. So here's a diagram to sort of illustrate the steps in the process. So this example uses the idea of, okay, I want to provide computer software, right? We buy, a license to various kinds of software on the internet all the time. The software vendor has the license. You see on the right a distributed hash table. That information is tracked against the hash table. Here I'm the user. I want to get the license to the software. I have made a payment transaction down here. This is checked through a blockchain lookup to make sure I've paid, compared against the distributed hash table, and to make sure that the time period of my license is valid, remains valid, and therefore I still have access to and continuing rights to use the computer software. So that technique, however, is constrained by the fact that you need an executable phase in the content that is being managed by that invention. This is another technique that we've created which allows blockchain-controlled distribution of a series of episodic stream content. So this happens a lot in today's world where, let's say, I as a company want to sell you a season of Game of Thrones on HBO that you can digitally stream and watch. And I want to give you access to it in advance, but I don't want to have to go back and track every time you've watched an episode and you pay me per episode or not. But if I could give you access in advance and have you pay me just for the episodes you watch, that would create a new form of business model for the content distributor, right? There's different ways they could pay. You don't have to, maybe I don't want to pay for the whole season, I just want to pay for things I watch. So this provides that flexibility, and here's a diagram of how it would work. So this harkens back to sort of our original first invention we talked about. You have a first user and a second user, two different nodes on a network. So I, as the first user, let's say I'm the consumer, I want the rights to some episodic or series of content. What I would do here first is I would initiate a payment transaction's down here. Then using that deterministic key common secret invention, what would happen next is there would be a content request from my node to the supplier of the content in this case through a common derived secret, and if the information matches up and I've actually paid and I have the rights to access the content, then a content that's encrypted will be sent back to me using the common secret, and I'll be able to access it. And this can be set in a way so that I end up only paying for the things I actually watch, so that there's sort of a secure communication sent through the common secret anytime I sort of like decide, oh, I want this music file, I want this particular form of content. So it provides a content provider more flexibility than just pay me in advance for the whole season, or pay me every time you download a particular song or music file. It can be set up saying, anytime you want access to something, we'll, through our common secret deterministic key techniques, determine if you've had rights to it, and therefore you pay me, could be also paid automatically in the blockchain for what you want, when you want it. And that provides more both efficiencies as well as flexibility for the rights holders in their business models. So those are just some examples of the innovations that we are creating at nChain. I hope it answers some of the questions people have out there about what we're doing. We're working on a lot more, which are also techniques that improve behaviors with and functionality on the Bitcoin network. Particular use cases like I've talked about. What we're doing these patents is a common question. People are like, oh, people don't like patents in the blockchain world. Just because we're protecting our IP doesn't mean we're not necessarily going to allow access to it, particularly to those of you who are working the Bitcoin community without fees or without royalties. Patent and IP owners just want to be able to control who uses their innovations and under what terms. But that doesn't necessarily mean we're not going to be giving out, as we intend to do, some of our innovations for usage by the community without expecting payment of it in return. But as Dr. Wright mentioned earlier, it could be that we are perfectly happy to let the Bitcoin community use a lot of our IP without charge, but other blockchains, we won't. And those are some business decisions we'll make that we think will allow us to help spur further innovation in the Bitcoin community. So I'll end by saying, I want all of you to understand, we as a business are here to help enable the Bitcoin community, because we believe if the entire Bitcoin network grows, if through some of the innovation that we are able to put out, you can grow your businesses, you can do more on the Bitcoin network, the value of Bitcoin itself will grow. That will help everyone who's in this room. It will create a new economy. It will create a new powerful world where all of these ideas we're having are just the tip of the iceberg, and all of you will probably build on many more ideas that we come up with and build even greater things we can't even think about. If we do that, I think it's a win-win for everyone. It will fulfill, those two life lessons I talked about in the beginning, which is the power of finding ways to win in life and business, and more importantly, by doing it in ways that are different, that break boundaries, and not by trying to be the same as everyone else. That's the lesson I've learned in my life in the United States, being from Vietnam. I hope it's the lesson you carry out from all of you being here today about we at nChain, what we're trying to accomplish, and what we want you to really get from our innovation. So thank you very much.